Forget everything you think you know about the limits of Iranian military capability. What unfolded in the pre-dawn hours over the Negev desert was not another symbolic strike for domestic consumption in Tehran. It was not a demonstration designed to satisfy hardline political factions while carefully avoiding meaningful damage. It was the fifth coordinated hypersonic missile operation in a sequence that has been systematically testing, probing, and degrading the layered Israeli missile defense architecture with a methodical patience that Western analysts have consistently underestimated because they began with the assumption that Iran could not sustain this operational tempo. They were wrong. A Fateh-2 hypersonic glide vehicle, the most advanced ballistic delivery system in Iran's current operational arsenal, impacted within the security perimeter of the Negev Nuclear Research Center at Dimona. I am not going to soften that. I am not going to qualify it into meaninglessness. Having served in military intelligence environments where the precise language of targeting outcomes matters enormously, I can tell you that what that sentence describes is a reality with implications so severe that I understand why every institutional voice from Jerusalem to Washington is working to manage how you receive it. They would rather you did not understand. I am here because you need to. Let us begin with what the public record establishes. Iranian state media confirmed the launch within hours, attributing it to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force. Israeli military censorship restrictions complicated immediate reporting, but damage assessment imagery, circulated through regional intelligence channels, indicated structural effects in an outer security zone of the Dimona complex. The Israeli Defense Forces acknowledged intercepting the majority of the incoming salvo, a formulation that anyone with experience reading military press releases will recognize as a careful construction that does not claim complete interception. The word majority is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Majority is not all. And at Dimona, the difference between all and majority is the difference between a close call and a crisis of a kind that has no modern precedent. Before we go any further, I need you to understand what the Fateh-2 actually represents, because the trajectory from Iran's ballistic missile program 15 years ago to the system that flew toward Dimona in the past 48 hours is a story of determined engineering achievement under sustained international sanctions pressure that the Western analytical community has consistently failed to credit accurately. The Fateh-2 is Iran's second-generation hypersonic glide vehicle, building on the original Fateh program that was publicly revealed in June 2023. The system employs a boost glide trajectory in which a ballistic booster accelerates the warhead section to hypersonic velocities, typically defined as above Mach 5, before the glide vehicle separates and employs aerodynamic maneuvering to adjust its terminal approach path. The maneuvering capability is the critical characteristic. Traditional ballistic missiles follow predictable parabolic trajectories that missile defense systems can model and intercept. Hypersonic glide vehicles do not fly predictable trajectories. They maneuver, and a system that maneuvers during its terminal phase presents a fundamentally different computational challenge to any interceptor battery, including the David's Sling and Arrow 3 systems that constitute Israel's upper-tier missile defense architecture. The Arrow 3 system, developed jointly by Israel Aerospace Industries and Boeing, is a genuinely impressive engineering achievement. It operates as an exo-atmospheric interceptor, meaning it attempts to engage incoming threats above the atmosphere at altitudes exceeding 100 kilometers. The system carries a hit-to-kill kinetic warhead rather than proximity detonating explosive, which requires extremely precise terminal guidance in the final engagement phase. Arrow 3 achieved meaningful success against traditional ballistic trajectories, but the engagement geometry against a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle is categorically more demanding. The interceptor must predict where the target will be at the moment of collision, and a target that can alter its trajectory introduces uncertainty that compounds exponentially as engagement ranges decrease. David's Sling, the mid-tier system, operates at lower altitudes against shorter-range threats. Neither system was designed against the specific performance envelope that the Fateh-2 exploits. What the mainstream media will not tell you is that this was the fifth operation in a deliberate sequence, not a collection of independent strikes. The first four waves were not simply attacks. They were reconnaissance operations in the most consequential sense of that word. Each wave generated data about Israeli defense response patterns, about which radar systems activated and in what sequence, about intercept attempt geometries, about which approach vectors generated successful interceptions and which created tracking difficulties. Iranian aerospace engineers and operational planners have been studying that data with the same analytical discipline that any competent military organization applies to combat experience. The Fatah 2 wave was not designed by people who were guessing about Israeli defense capabilities. It was designed by people who had observed those capabilities under operational conditions 4 times previously and who refined their approach accordingly. That is what professional militaries do. And the fact that Western commentary has consistently portrayed these operations as expressions of Iranian frustration rather than Iranian learning is a failure of analysis that has contributed directly to the outcome we are now confronting. Stay with me because the strategic interpretation of what happened at Dimona requires understanding something about nuclear facility architecture that classified briefings address with a directness that public discourse usually avoids. The Negev Nuclear Research Center is not simply a research institution. It is the production center for Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons program, a program that the Israeli government maintains under a policy of deliberate ambiguity, refusing to confirm or deny nuclear weapons possession while operating a facility whose plutonium production capacity has been estimated by authoritative sources, including the Federation of American Scientists, at levels consistent with a stockpile of approximately 90 warheads. The facility is built with significant hardening, with deep underground sections designed to survive conventional air attack. The surface structures and outer security zones are considerably more vulnerable. What impact on the outer security perimeter means in practical terms depends on exactly what systems were in that perimeter. Information that Israeli censorship restrictions make difficult to characterize precisely. What it means symbolically and politically is not ambiguous at all. Here is what actually happened in the hours following the strike in terms of Israeli decision-making at the senior level. The Security Cabinet convened under conditions that Israeli media, operating under military censorship protocols, could only characterize in the most general terms. The intelligence assessment crossing the table was not pleasant. Iran has now demonstrated the ability to reach Dimona with a hypersonic system that the existing defense architecture cannot guarantee interception against. That assessment carries implications for Israeli deterrence theory, for the viability of the current strategy of operating a nuclear program under ambiguity, and for the calculation about whether escalation options against Iranian nuclear infrastructure remain viable when Iran has already demonstrated willingness and capability to conduct reciprocal strikes against Israeli nuclear facilities. I have been in enough rooms where deterrence calculations are made to understand that this is the kind of moment that reorders strategic assumptions that policymakers have treated as fixed for decades. What I have not yet explained is the regional proliferation dimension, because any serious analysis of an Iranian hypersonic strike on Dimona that omits this dimension is deliberately incomplete. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Egypt are all watching this sequence of events with an attention that their public statements carefully conceal. Every government in the region with the financial resources and the political motivation to pursue advanced military technology has now received a vivid operational demonstration that hypersonic glide vehicles work, that they can reach hardened targets, and that existing air defense architectures cannot guarantee interception. The implications for regional military procurement patterns over the next decade will be profound. More immediately, the implications for Saudi and Emirati calculations about their own security relationships with Washington, about the value of American extended deterrence guarantees, and about whether their own defense investments should include hypersonic technologies will be revised based on what they watched happen over the Negev in the past 48 hours. The consequence cascade from this single strike event extends from the tactical to the civilizational, with a speed that should genuinely alarm anyone who has studied how regional conflicts transition from manageable to catastrophic. At the immediate military level, Israel faces pressure to respond in a manner that restores deterrence credibility without triggering an escalation sequence that its American patron is urgently trying to prevent. At the regional level, the demonstration of Iranian hypersonic capability against nuclear infrastructure creates a precedent that every regional actor will incorporate into its threat assessment and its own weapons development calculus. At the great power level, American extended deterrence commitments in the Middle East rest partly on the premise that American and Israeli air defense systems can protect partners from this category of threat. That premise has now been publicly tested and found to be conditional rather than absolute. At the global level, the possibility that a regional conflict involving nuclear facility targeting, even conventional strikes on nuclear facilities, could produce radiological consequences that do not respect national borders introduces a category of risk that international security architecture is entirely unprepared to manage. The next 72 hours will determine whether Israeli political leadership chooses a response pathway that narrows this crisis or one that opens it into something that no party involved actually controls. Decisions being made right now in Jerusalem and Tehran and Washington will echo not for years, but for generations. I wish I could tell you the institutional wisdom of those decision makers is equal to the moment. What I have observed over decades of watching these institutions operate under pressure gives me no basis for that confidence. Watch closely. The window for de-escalation is not infinite, and it is closing.